The goal here, again, is to provide a rallying point, but also an honest spot, a place where we can discuss, where we can have a back and forth about the issues that we're facing, as well as the solutions to them. I think it's critically important that we have such a square, town square, if you want, because our traditional media, our mainstream media, corporate media, isn't serving that role. And in fact, I don't even think you can find much alternative written, words, as opposed to spoken words, but written words in anywhere that talk about what we're discussing. I mean, again, I looked back, and in 2016, there was like maybe one alternative daily in the entire country, or one alternative newspaper that endorsed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, even though it was obvious he was a much, much better choice. And even if you say, well, it wasn't obvious to me, Al, I thought Hillary was a really good choice. Even if you take that position, you have to acknowledge Bernie got north of 40% of the Democratic primary votes. In a country where the newspapers are by and large significantly, by a significant majority, Democratic leaning, how could you possibly argue that the media is fairly representative of the populace if there's only one alternative print media that endorsed the guy who got over 40%, right? I mean, you'd think it would be maybe 4 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 50, 1 out of 100. No, it was like 1 out of a few thousand, maybe. I think that was the Seattle Times or something that endorsed Bernie in the primaries. That was it. Quite extraordinary, really. You don't get a progressive view in the media. And even endorsing Bernie really wouldn't have been that extreme by any means. I mean, this was a guy who was running as a Democrat, one of the two corporate parties he was running in. So there isn't print media, whether it's virtual print or hard paper print, that's progressive in this nation. It just isn't there. There are some relatively progressive podcasters, live streamers like myself. We have very small, in general, smaller numbers of viewers. But YouTube does tend to have a little bit more variation. Very few, the Substack and all of them. I haven't found very many who are full-throated green supporters. So that's why we do this. So we can have that place for people who recognize that the two parties are the problem. They spearhead the problem. They represent the billionaire class. This is a good example of what I'm talking about from the New York Times. A lot of people, the New York Times is great. They're the only reason I can get up in the morning is to read the New York Times. Well, they're not giving you anywhere near the full story. This is the New York Times trying to be, I guess, bipartisan maybe, although Swozzi's a Democrat. But, they're putting this more corporate, I guess, conservative Tom Swozzi, who's been more critical of the Democratic elite, Democratic leadership than many, but he's been critical from the right. So that's what you get. You don't get an aggressive review of Democratic parties from a leftist perspective. You don't get that in the New York Times. Here's what Tom Swozzi has to say. The wake-up call America needs. That's what he's calling the Trump election. I hope progressives view this as a wake-up call, as a recognition. I hope it generates recognition that we cannot continue down this path, this two-party path. We need an alternative. We need to build a movement that takes on both parties. That's not what Tom Swozzi is going to say. Tom Swozzi, I think, wants the Democrats to become more like the Republicans. So his assessment is that it was a mandate for border security, immigration reform, low inflation, economic stability. So, I mean, those are platitudes by and large, common ground on culture war fight. But let me take low inflation. Low inflation was a factor. Inflation was a factor because it means the implications of higher prices during the Biden administration, the implication of it was lower real wages for working people. Working Americans saw their paychecks going less far. They were going shorter and shorter. They were covering less and less over the Biden years. And that's why inflation was such a big problem. If you had seen wages rising at a faster clip than prices, which does happen on occasion. For example, during World War II, we had significant inflation, but workers were getting even faster increases in their wages. And the Roosevelt administration, the Democrats, were popular because real wages, because the actual cost of living was dropping relative to wages. So the real problem isn't just that prices were rising, it's that workers were not benefiting from those price hikes. The billionaire class benefited from those price hikes. They captured all, or not virtually all, more than all of the profits because the wages dropped versus what they were paying workers dropped versus the increase in the prices that they were able to charge. But Suozzi doesn't want to talk about workers. He doesn't want to talk about wages because he is, in fact, he's supported by the billionaire elites. He doesn't want to piss them off or to say we need to pay workers more. He as far as he goes, is economic stability. Border security, immigration reform are problems for a couple of reasons. One, the crime issue is real, but it's overstated by demagogues. Immigrants tend not to be particularly criminal, but you do have some, obviously, crimes committed by poor people coming into this country who can barely, who need to survive, who want to survive. So you'll see some increase in crime as a result of relatively porous borders. But the bigger problem, again, is wages. When you increase labor, you reduce wages. An increase of anything leads to a drop in the price it can command, that it can sell for. So labor sells for wages. And with more immigrants, whether legal or not, whether documented or not, prices are going to have downward pressure. Wages are going to be subject to downward pressure. So again, the factors that Suozzi identifies are somewhat, he touches on them, but he doesn't directly address what Democrats need to do, which is promote better wages, higher wages versus prices and jobs. He doesn't talk about that because that's not the true Democratic agenda. Democratic agenda is simply to position themselves as apparently better for workers, not to actually promote policies that will make life better for workers. And you see that. You don't see one word from Suozzi in this op-ed calling for the policies that would make life better for working people. There's not one word about Medicare for all. There's not one word, but the wars that we're fighting are incredibly harmful to working people. They increase the budget deficit. They lead, therefore, that which also, by the way, causes higher prices. Some of them are at risk. of being killed. The world is a more dangerous place because of our promotion of the proxy war against Russia. The world is a more dangerous place because of our support for genocide. We're hated. And we have less money, less resources available to address the problems that poor, struggling, and working people are facing. So if you had a party, or if you had a Democrat who was committed to improving the quality of life for poor, struggling, and working people, then they would be talking about these very issues. But they're not mentioned. Because, let's face it, most Democrats just don't give a crap. Even those like AOC and Bernie, who is actually, an independent. But let's just stick with AOC and some of the squad members. They may be, I believe, somewhat concerned about working people, but they're not going to take on their party. And the only way to improve the quality of life for poor, struggling, working Americans is to reject both parties. Where does Swozy go? Where does the New York Times choice for this op-ed go? To reject the party's significant leftward shift. Now, he doesn't identify what that means, but it's generally a criticism of, I guess, identity politics, wokeism. And I agree with that, yeah, as far as it goes. We shouldn't elevate the challenges facing one particular group over those of members of other groups who are also facing significant challenges. I agree with that. It causes great resentment. And understandably so. But, I mean, just because Democrats say we should oppose Tennessee's law to make it harder or to make it impossible for there to be trans care for youth, right? That's the law in Tennessee. You can't have gender-affirming care in Tennessee if you're a minor. It's not going to be legal, I guess, at least with respect to any kind of beta blockers or anything like that keep kids from having their periods if they're girls, or from reaching adolescence if they're boys. That's the law in Tennessee now, and a lot of Democrats were criticizing it. And sure, that standing out in front of the Tennessee court, Tennessee state legislature, and complaining about it and attacking them is going to irritate people. But the bigger issue is not that Democrats are championing some identity groups that may not be popular. Bigger issue is they don't champion workers. They don't fight for struggling, poor, and working people. And that's why we need to go in a different direction. Because they're never going to. Because they won't. It's just that simple. That's why I do this program. All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Yeah. So I did write a little response that I posted there on the New York Times, and it got some recommendations more than I would. Sometimes they won't even put what I write up there, but my goal is to be a little less, I guess, harshly critical sometimes in these little posts. So here was what I wrote, because that's what Swazi's big complaint is. The problem is the Democrats' leftward shift. So Democrat Party's leftward shift, laugh out loud, paying lip service to identity issues in order to keep the working class divided up. That's the function. And at the same time, perpetuating genocide, endless war, increasing production of fossil fuels, and ensconcing for-profit health care's tentacles ever tighter. That's not what I'd call a leftward shift. And I think most people wouldn't. And that's why the Democratic Party is struggling. Because they're not on your side. They're not on the side of working people. It's very, very unfortunate. We've got to recognize that. We can't pretend there's something different going on. That is just the truth. And the way we deal with it is acknowledge it, accept it, and try to change things. This party is tied to the billionaire class, Democratic Party. This party is tied to endless war. This party is tied to genocide. This party is tied to for-profit healthcare. Gotta move in a different direction in 2025.